Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone to OASW's 2023 Annual General Meeting and Joan MacKenzie Davies Lecture. I'm Omar Ansari, Manager of the Local Engagement Network Program at OASW, and I will be moderating parts of our AGM today. Before we begin, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that although we are located within different cities across the province, we are all operating on Indigenous land. Today, I am speaking to you from the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. More specifically, I acknowledge that this land is covered by Treaty 13, agreed upon by the Mississaugas of the Credit and the British Crown. As we gather today, I invite us all to take a moment to acknowledge and reflect upon the lands on which we are individually situated and the historical impact of multi-generational effects of colonization, broken treaties, and oppressive laws that have occurred. An undeniable consequence of this is the violence that has been inflicted upon Indigenous people. It is important to acknowledge that today is Red Dress Day and the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Two-Spirit, Transgender, and Gender-Diverse Peoples. This national crisis is a human rights issue that is directly linked to ongoing acts of colonization, racism, poverty, and environmental destruction that impacts the lives of innumerable Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, transgender, and gender-diverse peoples. OASW echoes the calls for justice in Reclaiming Power and Place, the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. We acknowledge the role the social work profession has played in contributing to colonization and support those calls focused on social workers, including increasing training to decolonize social work practice and recognize Indigenous self-determination over child welfare. Today and every day, we honor the truth of family members and survivors of violence and commit to amplifying Indigenous voices and perspectives. As an association, we will continue to provide our members with opportunities to critically reflect and take action to decolonize their practice, advance reconciliation, and end violence against Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, transgender, and gender-diverse peoples. For myself, as a second-generation settler, I am committed to deepening my own understanding of local Indigenous communities and to acknowledge my responsibilities to both land and community. I respectfully recognize the presence of Indigenous peoples both in the past and the present, and their high regard for the land and all things living as we commit to meaningful dialogue and necessary change. At OASW, we are also actively prioritizing equity integration. And as part of this work, it is important to acknowledge Canada's history of enslavement, racial segregation, and marginalization, along with their devastating impacts on people of African descent. The existence of systemic anti-Black racism and inequality in education, housing, employment, health, criminal justice, politics, and other areas can be directly traced to the complex legacies of the dehumanizing enslavement of African people in Canada. Canada has neither recognized nor educated the public adequately about the historical facts related to slavery and the anti-Black racism it has produced. Despite this, Black Canadians have made outstanding contributions to Canada in every field, which is all the more remarkable given the legacy of slavery. It is necessary to recognize the history of Black Canadians in order to build a more just society, one that is free from discrimination. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'll now pass the floor to OASW's President, Dr. Peter Donohue, to get us started.
Well, thank you, and welcome once again to OASW's 2023 Annual General Meeting. My name is Dr. Peter Donohue, and I'm truly both humbled and honored to serve as President of OASW. I am pleased to see such a wonderful turnout today at our first ever hybrid AGM. But before calling this meeting to order, I would like to ask that we confirm that quorum has been reached.
I can confirm that quorum has been reached.
Thank you, Rita. I will now call the meeting to order and declare we have a quorum present. So you should now see today's agenda on your screen. Our first hour together this afternoon will focus on the business portion of our meeting, including reports from OASW's executive officers and the presentation of OASW's 2023 annual awards. It certainly has been a very busy year, so the reports are actually quite informative and exciting this year. Following the adjournment of the business meeting, we will move into our fourth annual Joan MacKenzie Davies Lecture with keynote speaker Dr. David Goldbloom. There will be designated time for questions during both the business portion of the AGM and after our keynote address. We will now ask you to approve today's agenda. So we have a motion moved by Rochelle Ashcroft, seconded by Sylvie Rivard, to approve the agenda.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. You have also received the minutes for OASW's 2022 annual general meeting. We will ask you to approve these minutes. We have a motion moved by Nancy Webb, seconded by Carol Soares, to approve the minutes of the 2022 annual general meeting. Please vote on the motion now.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you, Rita. We'll now move on to the reports from our executive officers, and I have the pleasure of starting us off with the President's report. First of all, I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. I'm always staggered by our members' immense commitment to working together to advance the shared goals of our association and profession. Your presence here today demonstrates that commitment. And my understanding is that we have 400 plus members online, one of the largest AGMs we've ever had. This past year has been marked by countless examples of leadership, innovation, and collaboration by social workers across the province. You've shown incredible dedication to ensuring that Ontarians get the care and support that they need. You have worked together across disciplines to shape the future of mental health care in the province. And you have demonstrated courage and leadership as we transition away from the height of the pandemic to navigate new normals time and time again. And speaking of adjusting to change, today also marks OASW's first ever hybrid AGM. I'm speaking to you today from OASW's offices, along with our CEO, Dr. D.P. Sir, and a number of my fellow board members. We will also be joined by speakers and directors signing in from their homes and offices across the province. It's new territory for OASW, like so much of the past 3 years have been for us. It's this environment of uncertainty that makes it so critical to have a sound strategy and vision for the future of the association in place. So proudly, after a multi-year collaboration with our board, members, and stakeholders, we released our new 5-year strategy plan in 2022. The plan builds on the successes we've shared and sets a bold path for the future of social work in Ontario. Our mission as the voice of the social work profession remains strong and unchanged. Our new vision, mobilizing mental health and well-being across Ontario, acknowledges the critical role our profession in unlocking access to mental health care across this province. It is also a vision that I'm proud to stand behind. It's inspiring and aspirational, but it gives unrivaled expertise, leadership, and commitment of our members. I would argue that this is a vision that was within reach and one that we can achieve together. Practically speaking, our new strategic plan serves as a compass rather than a roadmap. We can't predict precisely what the next 5 years will bring. No one can. I think certainly the last few years have taught us that. But with this new plan in place, we know exactly the values, strategies, and priorities that will guide the work we do for our members, the profession, and ultimately the clients we serve. Our 4 strategic directions lay a strong foundation to guide our work over the next 5 years. In collaboration with our members, we are committed to shaping the future of social work, leading equity integration, growing our membership and enhancing our engagement, and building a sustainable future for the association and for the profession. The explicit focus on equity is a groundbreaking direction for our organization. Importantly, we see this work as a journey rather than a destination. We also recognize the importance of ensuring that this work is collaborative, that it is deeply informed by our members, and that it is flexible and responsive to the ever-changing environment that we operate within. At OASW, we also understand the important role we play for the future of our profession. That's why we focus our efforts in 2022 on advancing critical advocacy, raising the profile of our profession, standing behind our commitment to equity integration, and strengthening our sector through high-quality professional development and valuable networking and connection. We were also proud to welcome more than 1,800 new members who are joining us in our vision to mobilize mental health and well-being across the province. It's my understanding that we're now sitting at approximately 8,500 members. It's just incredible, our growth that we've seen over the last few years. And this new vision also anchors the theme of our 2022 annual report. The report highlights the valuable contributions of our members in advancing our shared work, profiling OASW's achievements in 2022 against the 4 directions outlined in our new strategic plan. This work was guided by the insights and expertise of our member-led board of directors, who I'm fortunate to work in collaboration with to guide the work of the association. I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge each of my colleagues on the board for their leadership and dedication to the association. I have to say, I'm always truly humbled by the expertise, the knowledge, the values, and the thoughtfulness of the colleagues I get to work with on this board each and every day. I'd also like to take this time to pay tribute to a valued board colleague. It is with profound sadness that I share that longstanding board member Patrick Fleming passed away on February 28th of 2023. Patrick's commitment to social work education through his teaching and mentoring of students and to our profession through his work on the OASW board was unparalleled. Over a career and membership spanning more than 4 decades, Patrick's dedication, much of his effort to geriatric mental health, serving as a champion for addressing elder abuse at all levels. He touched so many lives over many years, truly exemplifying the saying, a life well lived. So on behalf of the entire OASW community, we offer our heartfelt thanks to Patrick and our deepest sympathies to his family. Patrick truly exemplified the qualities that I'm most proud of in our profession, and they're the same qualities I see when I think about social work's contributions to mental health and well-being across our province. When I look at the incredible dedication, talent, and achievements of our members, our board, and our OASW team, I'm so proud to say that I'm a social worker and an OASW member. Thank you for your work and your membership in 2022. I think the future of social work is bright, and I really look forward to shaping it together with our members. So thank you. I'd now like to invite OASW's Chief Executive Officer, Dr. D.P. Sir, to share her report.
Thank you, Peter. I always value this opportunity to speak to you directly, our members, 8,500 and counting. Especially important today to reflect on the past year because our accomplishments, our challenges, our successes are never ours alone. From advancing advocacy to building vibrant social work communities and developing innovative learning with you across Ontario for our profession, we truly share in this work with our members across the province. In 2022, we remained incredibly focused on the road ahead with the release of our new strategic plan. We use this to guide our next 5 years. Aligned to the plan is the theme and title of 2022's annual report, Mobilize. This truly captures the spirit of our work, my work, our passion, and the passion we all share across the spirits of OASW's profession and social work in Ontario. In 2022, we set our sights high, mobilizing to create strong recognition of the role and the value of social work in addressing mental health and wellness for Ontarians. We knocked on more doors than ever before to build relationships and to broker the right seats at the right tables for the right conversations. Through all of this advocacy, we continue to emphasize and demonstrate how crucial and critical it is for our profession to be included in shaping the future of mental health, well-being, mental health, and addictions in Ontario. And I'm proud to say that the right people are starting to take notice. Over the past year, we've seen more and more decision makers come knocking on our doors, looking for advice on our joint priorities. This progress is significant, and it's ours to share with you. Through our member-led advisory groups and subcommittees in health, long-term care, school social work, private practice, equity integration, and more, OASW's members have stepped up to offer their experience, their expertise, and especially their leadership to help us shape our work, our messaging, our positions, and our priorities together. I want to take this opportunity to thank each of our advisory group and subcommittee members for their commitment to advancing our profession and for lending your expertise on a continuous and regular basis. Ahead of the 2022 provincial election, we also mobilized to bring mental health access and the value of social work to the forefront. We met with all political parties, and we watched as our members activated in the provinces and communities, across the province and the communities they live in, on our collective priorities. In the media and in the public, we work to advance conversations around Ontario's mental health, addictions, and well-being strategies, and to build a clear understanding of the critical role social workers play as the largest providers of psychotherapy and counseling in this province. This included marking a record-setting year for media engagement and advancing thought leadership on workplace mental health. We did this to ensure that we were including the voice about social workers' role in supporting mental health. We did this alongside businesses, HR, and industry leaders in the insurance space. During Social Work Week, we, alongside you, allied professionals and stakeholders across Ontario, expanded our reach further than ever before with our campaign. This to ensure that our profession was not left off of important discussions. During this time, we also have been guided by our vision of equity integration. The Equity Integration Advisory Group has continued to help us prioritize leading the integration of equity for the association and our entire profession. In 2022, we moved this work forward by expanding equity-based programming, recruiting diverse expertise for our professional development, and diversifying our staff, board, and advisory groups. We worked hard to create opportunities to learn, to critically reflect with each other and with you, and to amplify those diverse perspectives through our communications, our professional development, and dialogue-driven conversations. Notably, we worked to secure renewed funding to drive a significant expansion of training. And we did this to design support for social workers in providing mental health care, well-being care, and addictions to equity-deserving groups. We also embarked on the collection of new demographic data through our learning and events specifically. This to build a better understanding of our members and learners and how to meet their unique needs. In 2022, we saw our members showed us that they were activated and engaged. They created robust networks with social work professionals across the entire province. Our local engagement ambassadors rallied behind the vision. They collaborated and led with their colleagues to build local community and connection all the time, every month through the entire year. By the end of this year, 2022, our 23 networks brought together more than 4,000 attendees at an impressive 176 events. With so many of us longing for that face-to-face connection, we were thrilled to see that many of our ambassadors started to incorporate hybrid or even in-person events for their networks. I'm truly in awe of the growth of those local engagement networks in 2022. It's staggering to see this program rise to such great heights in just 2 short years from its inception. And all of this thanks to the energy, commitment of our members, all of you. For our part, we remained committed to advancing the profession through innovative and relevant professional development, nearly doubling the offers that we had through the OASW Learning Center. To meet growing demand for high-quality skills development, we sought diverse expertise, we thought about modalities, sectors, and disciplines, and we onboarded more than 25 subject matter experts to our roster of facilitators in 2022. By the end of 2022, we are proud to have delivered more than 300 hours of professional development to almost 15,000 learners and members and non-members alike. As we move into the second year of our 5-year strategic plan, we focus on future-proofing the association, innovating in the delivery of our professional development, deepening our commitment to equity integration, and building and facilitating connection, collaboration amongst social workers in new and exciting ways. And we'll do this in partnership with all of you, our members, and our incredible board and staff. I do want to take a moment to personally thank every student, staff member at OASW who has worked hard to advance our priorities. But I especially want to send a shout out to Rita Mashrin, who many of you have seen as a core and fundamental part of OASW for decades. This year, Rita celebrates 35 years with all of us. Thank you, Rita, for all your contributions and many more to come. And so, on behalf of the OASW team, I'd like to thank each of you for remaining committed to the profession through your membership in 2022. Thank you to our board for the commitment and dedication of our strategic plan and the advancement of our work. I'm proud of what we've built together, and I'm especially aware that we have lots more to do, many challenges, many difficult discussions, many critical reflections to have together. But I can't wait to see what's next, and thank you for helping us mobilize in 2022. And now I'd like to welcome our Vice President, Dr. Rochelle Ashcroft, to provide the report for OASW's nominating committee.
Thank you, DP. On behalf of the nominating committee, I am pleased to report on the results of the 2023 elections. We were fortunate to identify 2 excellent candidates to join OASW's board. I would like to present the following slate for the 2023 to 2025 term on the OASW Board of Directors. Returning to the board are Tariq Ahmed, Shelley Craig, Lori Flinders McMillan, Sohila Pashang, Nancy Webb, and myself, Rochelle Ashcroft. Joining the board in 2023 are Student Director Carolyn O'Connor, MSW, RSW, and PhD student at the University of Toronto's Factor Inventage Faculty of Social Work, and Director at Large Angèle Bénard, BSW, MSW candidate, RSW, and National Director of Family Services with the Huntington Society of Canada, who joins us from the Sudbury area on a 1-year term to fill the vacancy of a director who resigned with 1 year remaining in their term. I would now like to put forward a motion, seconded by Sylvia Rivard, to accept the slate of directors as presented by the nominating committee and as approved by the board.
The board slate has been approved.
Thank you. I am pleased to present your new board of directors. As OASW's elections are staggered, board members Dr. Peter Donahue, Evelyn Uyghur, Marlene Deamoy, Sylvia Rivard, and Carol Suarez will be returning to serve the remaining year in their current term. OASW Board of Directors sets the association's policies and strategic direction, ensures that the organization stays on course to fulfill its mission, and advises the organization on issues affecting the social work profession and the public. Finally, I would like to encourage you to consider getting more involved in your association by participating in your local engagement network, applying to join an advisory group, taking advantage of our many events and professional development opportunities, and helping us to champion the profession during the Social Work Week and month in March. Your active participation and feedback is critical to advancing the profession and shaping the future direction of the association. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to welcome Evelyn Uyghur to provide us with an update on the Canadian Association of Social Workers.
Thank you, Rochelle. It's my pleasure to provide an update on the Canadian Association of Social Workers, which is a federation of social workers associations across Canada. I have the pleasure of serving as the OASW representative on the CASW board and connecting with our colleagues across Canada on issues of common interest and concern. The importance of a collective voice for the profession is more crucial than ever. CASW has developed a new strategic plan for 2023 to 2028 that includes 4 core pillars. 1, promote the profession. 2, strategic advocacy. 3, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And 4, strengthen the profession and association. OASW will be hosting the CASW and our federation partners in Toronto in June. At this meeting, CASW will present a new national code of ethics, as well as an anti-racism statement that is pending approval. I encourage all of you to take advantage of the opportunities to access many resources from the CASW member website, including recorded webinars, social work journals, a social work reference center, and much more. contact the OASW membership team to find out how to create your free CASW account. Thank you, and I look forward to providing future updates on our continued work together. I would now like to present my report as Treasurer Secretary. The association has never been stronger. At the end of 2022, we reached 8,456 members after seeing membership growth of 8%. You will now see OASW's 2022 audited financial statements on your screen. These can also be found on page 38 of our 2022 annual report. I would like to recognize the OASW board, CEO, and staff for their diligent stewardship and their judicious implementation of the board's strategic priorities. I would also like to thank the OASW Finance and Audit Committee for their role in developing the annual budget and carefully reviewing the auditor's independent report. I can confirm that the auditor's report expressed confidence in the association's financial process and systems, and the auditors indicated that the financial reports were presented fairly and accurately. Copies of the full statement are available from OASW for anyone who may be interested. I would now like to put forward a motion, seconded by Shelley Craig, to approve the audited financial statements for the year ending December 31st, 2022, as presented.
Thank you. The motion has been approved.
Thank you, Rita. For the past 3 years, the OASW has worked with BDO Canada LLP as our auditors. On behalf of the board and OASW Finance and Audit Committee, I am recommending their reappointment. I would like now to put forward a motion, seconded by Marlene Deamoa, to approve the appointment of BDO Canada LLP as our auditors for 2023. Please vote on this motion now.
Thank you. The motion has been approved.
Thank you for your support and involvement today. I will now invite OASW President Dr. Peter Donahue to field questions and seek approval of the executive officer's reports.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. I'd now like to open the floor to questions on the executive officer's reports. Please use the Q&A function on your Zoom menu bar to submit your questions, and OASW's Omar Ansari will moderate. Just while we're waiting, Omar, I just wanted to just say to our membership what an incredible year this has been in terms of the accomplishments and achievements of OASW. Every year I think, wow, I don't know how we're going to top that in the coming year, and somehow we seem to be able to do it. It's really down to the phenomenal work of my colleagues on the board and to our CEO, DP Sur, and the very dedicated team of professionals and staff she's pulled together under her. It's really, truly what you would want to call a dream team. I have to say, I've rarely had a pleasure in life to be able to work with such a wonderful group of people. And this is one of the organizations I so look forward to working to and attending the meetings.
Thank you, Peter. And as a staff member, I can definitely echo those sentiments. And we do have one question that has just come in. And it asks, what does the $108,091 expense for CASW cover?
Sure. DP, could I maybe call on you to respond to that?
Sure, great question. We recently rejoined CASW, and in this last year, we have seen some significant opportunities to partner, particularly on mental health and education. This last year, we were able to access a number of new educational opportunities, specifically around Francophone learning. We also partnered very closely with our CASW partners and staff to specifically look at our opportunity for inclusion of social work in federal as well as provincial mental health benefits and access programs. In addition, this last year, we have started to step up on our work with Truth and Reconciliation, Indigenous learning, anti-racism statements, all which are important at a national level and not just provincial. This year, we're excited to host CASW in Ontario for our Federation meeting for an opportunity to even further advance our strategic plan and thinking, specifically around equity integration and access to educational opportunities.
Thank you, DP. And so not a question, but a really nice comment that we'd like to share with everyone. Someone says, I would like to express my continuing appreciation to all of the executive and staff of OASW for the work you are doing on behalf of the profession. And also a special congratulations to Rita, again, for 35 years of exemplary service. Thank you very much for that comment. And just one more question that's just coming through. Is there any explanation for our deficit in 2022?
Yes, I'm happy to field that, Peter.
Sure, that would be great, DP.
Yeah, great question. And thank you for paying close attention to that. A deficit can feel really alarming. However, it is all in keeping with our financial plan. You may recall that we've actually previously built up a number of reserve funds from surpluses and the sale of our provincial office on Jarvis Street in 2020. As well, in 2022, we received more than $500,000 in grants, as you can see in the annual report. So the board has approved a financial strategy that is healthy and in line with our strategic plan to spend down on those reserves to benefit the members as a nonprofit association. This means that we keep still a large financial reserve to protect our future for up to 10 years at this point, and for the work and the contingency fund is still in place. However, the spend down on the reserves allows us to offer more and also expand the continuing opportunities. And a number of our initiatives are also covered through those grants, which we're proud to share just got renewed for this year as well in 2023.
Okay, so if there are no additional questions, we'll now move to approve the reports of the executive officers as presented. So we have a motion moved by Tashani Parker, seconded by Carolyn O'Connor, to approve the reports of the executive officers as presented. Please vote on the motion now.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you, Rita. We'll now move on to the approval of acts and deeds of the Board of Directors during the 2022 to 2023 term. We have a motion moved by Bonnie Schroeder, seconded by Nalini Gandhi, to approve the acts and deeds of the Board of Directors during the 2022-2023 term as reported. Please vote on the motion now.
Thank you. The motion has been approved.
Great. Thank you, Rita. I'm now very pleased to move on to a particularly rewarding part of today's agenda, the presentation of OASW's 2023 awards. And I'd now like to invite Vice President Lori Flinders McMillan to present our first award.
Miigwech, Peter. It's a pleasure to be with you today to announce that the awards committee has selected 2 social workers to receive this year's Inspirational Leader Award. The OASW Inspirational Leader Award is presented to social workers whose contributions to the profession inspire others and whose professional conduct serves as a role model for those working in the field of social work. This year, we were seeking nominees who inspire others through their leadership, optimism, and innovation, and who exemplified this year's Social Work Week theme of Social Work is Essential. It is my pleasure to announce that Charity Fleming has been selected as the 2023 recipient of the OASW Inspirational Leader Award. Charity is an Indigenous social worker who is passionate about delivering inclusive and culturally responsive services to Indigenous communities and to the people of diverse identities and cultural contexts. As an intergenerational survivor of residential school and the 60s scoop, Charity has dedicated her life to supporting Indigenous peoples' recovery from the experiences and impacts of historical trauma. While working in Six Nations, Charity identified early on the barriers to services that Indigenous people face and created a place where mental health services are provided directly in the Six Nations communities of Oshigwan. She has developed this dream into a busy office of 20 highly skilled professionals providing mental health services to 400 clients each year, not only locally, but also to clients in remote communities in Northern Ontario and in Quebec and British Columbia. Charity believes strongly in the concept of two-eyed seeing, which integrates Western and Indigenous concepts and ways of knowing. As the co-owner of Quelia Counseling Services, she works tirelessly to create spaces, programs, courses, clinical encounters, and knowledge that embody this critical concept. Examples include creating and running mental health day camps for Indigenous children and creating awareness campaigns for social justice, such as access to clean water on Indigenous reserves. Notably, Charity also developed the course entitled Miigwendikwaad, It Is Remembered, Sacred Circle CBT, which is a culturally responsive approach to CBT, offered through the Faculty of Social Work's Professional Development Program at Wilfrid Laurier University. The course has become nationally and internationally recognized. In her mentorship of frontline professionals, doctors, educators, psychotherapists, and social workers, Charity's energy and vision are infectious. Every day, she inspires her students and colleagues through her imagination, perseverance, and dedication. Please join me in celebrating and welcoming Inspirational Leader Award recipient, Charity Fleming.
Well, miigwech, chimigwech, big thank you to everyone. I am honored. My heart is full. I'm so grateful for the words shared. I'm grateful to even have been nominated for this award. It was a beautiful, wonderful surprise. I am so grateful to my colleagues who nominated me for this award. And sorry, my heart's just very full. To the professionals that make up our Quelia Counseling Services community, and to everyone who is so dedicated and shares my passion for serving our Indigenous populations. There's so many people I'd like to thank. I'd like to thank my work partner, Thomas Brown, who is the best example to me and of an ally. And I'd like to thank his partner and husband, Dr. Michael Lipoy. I'd like to thank my mom, if she's on here. She has been such a tireless example of dedication to Indigenous community through her work as a nurse practitioner along the North Shore. And I'd like to thank my husband and my family for their patience with me as I've put in so many hours at different times and stages of our life. I'm so grateful for their love and support. And I'd like to, last but not least, thank Creator, to thank God for being with me and helping to do the healing work that I'm able to do in Indigenous community. So chimigwech, thank you, everyone. It's an absolute honor.
Thank you and congratulations, Charity. My name is Tashani Parker, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today to represent OASW's Awards Committee. It is now my pleasure to announce that Marty Lampkin has been selected as a 2023 recipient of the OASW Inspirational Leader Award. Marty Lampkin is an Afro-Caribbean woman who lives by her motto, "My ancestors did not die for me to remain silent." She is a strong advocate and educator on the intersection of anti-Black racism for Black people living with autism spectrum disorder, intellectual disabilities, and neurodiversity. Marty's leadership has led to the founding of the first anti-racism Black cultural awareness group within a leading developmental disability and autism agency in the city of Toronto. She not only created a safe space for Black identifying clinicians across the agency, but led the development of anti-Black racism education and training for both leadership and frontline staff. Marty has consulted on discrimination issues within the disability sector and has developed a unique program for Black adults with autism spectrum disorder, also known as ASD. Her work has highlighted how Black families experience a lack of culturally appropriate care and increased incidences of racism when trying to access support for their children living with complex disabilities. Marty also developed a community program entitled Racism Affects Me Too, which focuses on the impacts of anti-Black racism on individuals living with intellectual disabilities or ASD. As a social worker, Marty specializes in therapy and counseling services for adults who identify as neurodivergent and their caregivers and families. Over the years, she has provided intensive case management services, complex support coordination, system navigation, individual and family counseling, as well as educational capacity building and training. As a professor in George Brown College's School of Community and Social Services, she is an advocate, educator, and consultant on issues of anti-Black racism, anti-oppression, and ableism, and has contributed to the development of a Black Futures campus hub space to provide supports to staff, faculty, and students. Marty is a living example of another one of her life mottos: self-doubt is a weapon of the colonizer, resisted at all costs. Please join me in celebrating and welcoming Inspirational Leader Award recipient Marty Lampkin.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much. I am very grateful to be here to accept this award. Again, it kind of caught me by surprise when I received the email myself. But I do want to just recognize that I don't accept this award to honor myself. I really accept this award to honor all the individuals and families that I've had the privilege to work with. The stories that you'll never hear because those voices, those Black voices, are silenced, and they're silenced within the social work profession. For all the individuals that have opened up their lived realities to me and have trusted me with that, to do that advocacy work on their behalf. I accept this award on behalf of the matriarchs in my family and in our communities that really have held us, that have taught us through our African ways of doing and our Caribbean knowledge holders. And I really accept this award on behalf of the fact that my ancestors, as Tashani stated, did not die for me to remain silent. And so everything I do will be done in honor of them, to continue to talk about the issues around the intersection of anti-Blackness and ableism, and how folks on the spectrum or living with intellectual disabilities are very much marginalized and disenfranchised, even within the helping profession as social workers. So I'm very grateful, and thank you so much.
Thank you and congratulations, Marty. Je me nomme Sylvie Rivard et je suis la représentante francophone au conseil d'administration de la TTSO. Je suis aussi membre du comité des prix. It is my absolute pleasure to announce that Dr. Samantha Anthony has been selected as the 2023 recipient of the OASW Beverley Antle Leadership Award. This award profiles the significant contributions that social workers make to organizations, decision-making bodies, and advocacy groups outside of our profession, recognizing a social worker who exemplifies the diversity of roles and career options that can build upon a degree in social work. Dr. Samantha Anthony fulfills a multi-pronged academic role in research, education, and direct clinical practice. Her unique position is split between the Factor in Wintosh Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto, the Sick Kids Transplant and Regenerative Medicine Center, and the Peter Gilgan Center Research and Learning. She also plays a pivotal role, national role, in the Canadian Donation and Transplantation Research Program. Dr. Anthony is the first and only Canadian health clinician scientist in social work. a notable example of leadership and ingenuity for social workers in evaluative sciences. Her unique lens as a clinical scientist social worker exemplifies the critical impact that qualitative research can have to prioritize and promote patients' voices in healthcare. Her leadership has been pivotal in driving meaningful change to improve practice and interventions. Additionally, her leadership roles in the Canadian Donation and Transplantation Research Program have made her the go-to person for input and expertise on qualitative methodologies, patient-family engagement and research, navigating leadership challenges, and other areas. Samantha's pioneering approach and personal creativity is an inspiration not only to her colleagues in social work, but to a next generation of learners seeking careers in non-traditional positions. Samantha proudly identifies as a social worker, and she has worked at the Hospital for Sick Children for 20 years in a frontline direct practice role supporting children and their families. Through her many contributions at local, national, and international conferences, workshops, and research collaborations, she unfailingly elevates and openly celebrates the fundamental nature of her background in social work. And as one of Dr. Anthony's PhD committee members and an exemplary role model, Beverley Antle provided great inspiration to Samantha in her pursuit to become a leader in pediatric social work research. Samantha, I'm thrilled to congratulate you on this recognition and invite you to share a few words.
Thank you very much. I am honored to be the recipient of the 2023 OASW Beverley Antle Leadership Award. I would like to thank the selection committee from the Ontario Association of Social Workers and also Dr. Laurie West for nominating me with the support of Dr. Faye Mishna, Dr. Cheryl Reguer, and Taylor Robertson. This achievement celebrating Beverley is exceptionally meaningful to me. As mentioned, I knew Beverley personally as a colleague at the Hospital for Sick Children and as my PhD supervisor before she passed away in 2006. For those here who knew Beverley, you will remember her zest for life and passion for her profession. Beverley was a role model for mentorship and leadership and a trailblazer in the field of social work research, using her platform as a social worker to further the field through science and evidence-based research. I accept this award proudly as a social worker who is a health clinician scientist. As mentioned, I am privileged as the first health clinician scientist in the field of social work in Canada to offer leadership through evidence-informed research that enhances health outcomes for pediatric patients and their families. The creation of my position as a health clinician scientist facilitated an innovative partnership between the Hospital for Sick Children and the Factor Inwintosh Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto, which is now an exemplar for others globally. I know Beverley would be proud knowing that an award in her name recognizes the unique leadership role of a health clinician scientist in social work. I share Beverley's belief that as social workers, we have natural and learned qualities that lend toward characteristics of strong leaders, demonstrate empathy, active listening, the ability to establish team synergy within groups, dynamic adaptability, and integrity. As social workers, we can bring these same characteristics to non-traditional settings, providing leadership in ways that others feel listened to, where they are encouraged to be engaged, and in capacities that directly influence the development of institutional practice initiatives and policy implementation across interdisciplinary fields. In closing, I would like to thank the many patients, families, and sick kids clinical team of nearly 25 years of whom I've had the privilege to work with. I want to acknowledge the members of my lab who demonstrate their hard work, dedication, commitment daily to ensure the success of our team and research program. I would also like to thank the many role models who have offered me unselfish mentorship and inspired me to continue to strive for excellence, including Laurie West, Jennifer Stinson, Rulin Parekh, and Linda Wright. Finally, I wish to thank my family and friends for their love and unwavering support. My parents are actually sitting in my dining room right now cheering me on. I accept this award with graciousness and in knowing that I have embraced my role as a social worker, as Beverley would have wanted, in settings of healthcare, academia, and research, demonstrating that leadership can be the foundation and strength of our field moving forward. Thank you very much.
Congratulations to each of our 2023 award recipients for this well-deserved recognition. I would say probably the one thing we don't do well as social workers is celebrate our accomplishments or promote our leaders. So I just always welcome this opportunity every year to really highlight, all of the incredible work that's going on in our profession. So thank you to each and every one of you. So this concludes our business portion of the AGM for today. So it's now my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the 4th annual Joan MacKenzie Davies Lecture, named in recognition of the outstanding service of Joan MacKenzie Davies, OASW's former CEO and longest serving CEO. So I would like to invite OASW current CEO, Dr. D.P. Sir, to introduce today's keynote speaker.
Welcome everyone to our 4th annual Joan MacKenzie Davies Lecture. Since 2020, this knowledge sharing component of our annual general meeting has recognized the outstanding service of Joan MacKenzie Davies, former CEO of OASW from 1992 to 2019. This year, our event falls within National Mental Health Week, which makes the focus of today's lecture all the more fitting. Our keynote speaker today is no stranger to leadership, no stranger to innovation and interprofessional collaboration in mental health in both Ontario and across Canada. It's my pleasure to welcome and to introduce Dr. David Goldbloom, former chair of the Mental Health Commission of Canada, former senior medical advisor at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, and professor of psychiatry at the University of Toronto. Dr. Goldbloom was born in Montreal and raised in Quebec and Nova Scotia. He completed an honors degree majoring in government at Harvard University and then attended the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, where he obtained an MA in psychological sciences. He's trained in medicine and psychiatry at McGill University and has been twice named the most outstanding teacher by the graduating medical class at the University of Toronto, where he continues to his role as a professor in psychiatry. He's authored numerous scientific articles, book chapters, and has provided talks and lectures to students, professionals, and public audiences. Dr. Goldbloom has also shared his insights through 2 best-selling books, How Can I Help? A Week in My Life as a Psychiatrist, and 2021's We Can Do Better, Urgent Innovations to Improve Mental Health Access and Care. He served as vice chair and then chair of the board of Mental Health Commission of Canada from 2007 to 2015. Dr. Goldbloom has also served as the founding physician-in-chief at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health and then senior medical advisor until his retirement from clinical practice in 2022. He served on the boards of the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health Foundation and Jack.org and continues to serve on the boards of the Graham Buck Foundation and Daymark Foundation. He's also an officer of the Order of Canada. Today, we are so pleased to welcome Dr. Goldbloom joining us to share timely insights on doing better together, innovation and collaboration to improve mental health access and care. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David Goldbloom.
Hi there. I'm Dr. David Goldbloom, and I am delighted to be with you all this afternoon. And I've now officially unmuted myself, so it's going to be a lot easier for you who are listening to this talk today. And I'm particularly happy that I logged on early in order to be able to hear about the people that you have celebrated within your profession today. And, I think it was Peter Donahue who said that we don't celebrate our colleagues often enough. We're very quick to call on them when they get into trouble, but less quick to celebrate them when they do something wonderful. So I'm very honored to be invited to give the Joan MacKenzie Davies Lecture, although it is somewhat daunting for me to follow in the footsteps of last year's lecturer, Charmaine Williams, who has been my friend and colleague for the last 30 years. Indeed, we first met when Charmaine was fresh out of social work school and looking for a job, and I was part of the crew that hired her to work in inpatient psychiatry at the Clark Institute of Psychiatry, and we have stayed friends ever since then. I have spent my entire career in hospital settings, knowing at close range what social workers can do in inpatient, outpatient, and emergency room settings. Beyond that, my late father-in-law, Nate Epstein, was from the early 1960s closely involved in the training of social workers at McGill in a new model of treatment, which was family therapy. He later continued that at McMaster, where he developed the McMaster model of family functioning and continued to champion a leading role for social workers in research and treatment with relationship to family functioning. I'd also like, with your indulgence, to dedicate my remarks today to another great social worker, my late aunt, Sheila Goldbloom, who was professor of social work at McGill and whose activism as a social worker continued into her 90s and was captured in her 2019 autobiography, Opening Doors, which is a wonderful read. And Sheila died last summer at age 96. But most of all, I'd really like to start by thanking all of you for the work that you do every day for individuals, for families and communities, whether it's in solo or group practice or as part of an agency or a community health team or in a hospital or in another setting. Whether you're on the front lines of care or working as an administrator, your work makes a difference for people. And as you all know, the history of collaboration between psychiatry and social work is indeed a very long one. I worked very closely with Steve Lurie of CMHA Metro Toronto, serving on his board during the about 87 years that Steve was the executive director of that organization, as well as with Jane Patterson at CAMH, where she was chief social worker for a number of years. And that's all the social work name dropping I will do in a desperate attempt to earn some credibility with all of you. I did review the strategic plan of your organization for the next 5 years. And indeed, it's entirely congruent with what is needed for innovation, which is specifically reflected in a collaborative spirit, but also a need for data, not only to identify the needs of your profession and to drive informed and effective decision-making for your profession, but also to demonstrate the value of what it is that you do for the people you serve, their families, and of course, our funders. Now, every official talk like this should have some disclosures and declarations. I have no financial declarations of any kind apart from book royalties, some honoraria for talks, and the famous Canada Pension Plan. But as you heard, I do serve on a couple of boards, including one called the Daymark Foundation, which is run by the grandchildren of another activist social worker, Margaret McCain, who did so much to advance early learning centers for children. Several years ago, I had to give an address to the College of Family Physicians of Canada. And I think the words I said to them would be no different than the words I would say to you today, which is to begin with an apology. As a psychiatrist, for the difficulties that you've faced in caring for people with mental illnesses and lacking sufficient support from my specialty. I know that psychiatrists are ranked among the worst among specialists with regard to availability for consultation and treatment. And I know many primary care colleagues in Canada who now acknowledge learned helplessness. They've given up on finding a psychiatrist to see their patients. Several years ago, I co-authored a study that looked at the practice patterns of psychiatrists in Ontario, and it caused quite a controversy within my own specialty. It showed that in oversupplied Toronto, where there are 63 psychiatrists per 100,000 population, which is well beyond the 15 per 100,000 that is recommended, access is still an issue. It's unacceptable to you, it's unacceptable to me, and it is starting to change. The problem is actually not the number of psychiatrists, but rather how they spend their professional time. In fact, we identified in our study a subgroup of psychiatrists who see 40 or fewer unique individuals in a year. Not acceptable. And we know that there are many innovative solutions around this problem, and I'm going to go into them in a moment. But as I said to the family doctors, the reality is simple, that there will never be enough psychiatrists to see all the Canadians with mental illnesses, nor should there be. Family physicians, people working in multidisciplinary teams, can and should be able to meet the mental health needs of most of the 1 in 5 Canadians who experience them every year. That you need to be supported around more challenging cases and to be able to refer those that require specialty skills. But you also need the skill set and the time to make a positive difference in the mental health of the people that you're serving. So I hope that we will do a better job as psychiatrists in the future, but I want to take you now into some of the areas of innovation. The first one, hastened by the pandemic, of course, was the provision of virtual care. Now, if I was with you in the room instead of with you virtually, I'd ask you to put your hands up as to how many of you had provided virtual care on a regular basis before the pandemic hit. And then how many of you have provided it since the pandemic hit? And a third relevant question is how many of you continue to provide it and plan to make it an available option for the people that you see? And it's fair to say that both the clinical necessity during the pandemic, as well as our own professional economic survival as mental health professionals, depended on our ability as both individuals and as systems of care to convert rapidly to what was for most people an entirely new way of working. I can tell you at CAMH, we went from 350 consultations per month via video to 3,500 consultations per month via video in 1 month. And it took a pandemic to scale up this form of person-centered rather than provider-centered care. But as always, there were lessons learned. We cannot forget the digital divide that leaves behind those individuals who lack the hardware, the software, the technical skill, the housing, the finances, and even the confidentiality setting to make this kind of care feasible. I think, in fact, it has sensitized some clinicians, not that social workers need any sensitization to this, but it has sensitized other clinicians to the social determinants of health and the barriers that they present in working in this new way. I can tell you that many people now prefer virtual care as recipients of care from a personal convenience perspective. And if you think about someone living on the outskirts of Metro Toronto who has to arrange time off work or childcare to travel an hour and a half to downtown for a brief encounter and then travel back, it's way more convenient for those individuals to be seen virtually. And it became an inadvertent reinvention of the house calls that my father and grandfather made routinely as pediatricians. It's a chance to see where and how people live, more easily to meet their families, their friends, and even their pets. And my experience of working during the pandemic was that I was doing up to 21 new virtual assessments each week. But I was talking to people as they sat in their bathrooms, in open fields, or even in cars with their phones sitting on the steering wheel as long as they were parked. So this may feel like a new technology, but let me take you back 25 years to when my colleagues and I published a randomized clinical trial of televideo assessment versus in-person consultation to Campbellford near Peterborough. And we measured therapeutic alliance and rapport. And what did we discover? We found that therapeutic alliance, way back in 1997 when we did the study, was just as high on televideo as it was in the office. And satisfaction was just as high for patients as it was in the office. It was a little lower, the satisfaction, for providers, but frankly, that wasn't our biggest concern. And this had a huge impact on me as a consultant to underserved communities. I had been, for the previous 20 years, flying into places like Kenora and Timmins and even up to the Arctic to provide clinical care. That ended when I saw the results of the research and we were able to establish televideo connections to underserved communities. What it meant for me was much less time lost in travel, less cost to the system, because as you know, it's cheaper to fly to Europe than it is to fly to Kenora, less of a carbon footprint, but also fewer aeroplane points for me. What it also evolved into, and this preceded the pandemic, was improving access to care in small communities, communities of 10,000 people, like Elliott Lake or New Liskeard, where I was the psychiatric consultant. And it really meant that people would typically wait 4 weeks or less to get a psychiatric consultation. That's a huge improvement. But let's go even further back in televideo to the first published reports of the use of this innovation. And the first report comes out of Nebraska in 1957, when they were using televideo to provide psychiatric care to a distant community within the state. About 5 years ago, I co-authored an editorial called Telepsychiatry 2.0. And I noted at that point that only 7% of Ontario psychiatrists were providing televideo assessment. Then COVID made it 100%, almost overnight. However, psychiatry was lagging far behind other specialties because a survey done in 2014 showed that 24%, a quarter of all physicians in Ontario, were using telemedicine in clinical practice. And if there's one specialty that doesn't need to touch patients in the context of a clinical exam, it's psychiatry. So we were way behind. And back in 1957, the study said that mentally ill patients will improve significantly in behavior patterns when given therapy by closed circuit television. So what's old is new again. Now, all of you had the same experience I did of trying to work through the pandemic. And we saw lots of people in distress. Countless surveys said that 20 to 25% of the population was struggling with feelings of depression and anxiety. And let me add, that's not the same as a clinical disorder, because lots of us struggle at various times with anxiety and depression feelings without meeting the threshold for a psychiatric diagnosis. But it also reflects the reality that mental health is on the public and political agenda like never before, and that also drives demand for services. Despite fears that suicide rates were going to go up in the pandemic, they did not. And in fact, they have gone down. They've gone down across 20 countries compared to pre-pandemic times. However, the opioid crisis persists and has intensified, and high-risk populations remain vulnerable. So the public health and public discussion around depression, anxiety, and social functioning has been much more prominent during the pandemic than it was, for instance, during SARS in 2003, another outbreak that I had the good luck to work through. And so if COVID did not actually create a tsunami of mental health problems, it certainly exposed the roiling sea of them that had been churning since long before 2020. At the same time, if you look at the speed of vaccine development, a world record where we had vaccines within months rather than the previous fastest time, which was the mumps vaccine, which took 8 years. That has raised everybody's expectations around innovation and timelines. People are looking to all of us as health professionals to do new things, do more things, and do things faster. Governments are prioritizing mental health in a variety of ways, and even in the private sector, rather. I was walking past a bus shelter in Toronto where there was a big ad for Bell Canada saying that it provides no limits on mental health benefits for employees seeing registered mental health professionals, and that certainly includes all of you. And that's a far cry from the days when people got $500 per year for mental health care or massage. And so taking the cap off of mental health care benefits is actually a wise investment by corporate Canada, because the return on investment in terms of reduced disability costs pays for the costs of funding mental health care. And here in the midst of Mental Health Week, the Canadian Mental Health Association has actually called for universal healthcare funding. Now, a survey done 2 months ago of how Canadians perceive their own access to mental health care is blunt and clear. Half of Canadians give their province a failing grade in terms of access to mental health professionals for all residents. Only a quarter of Canadians think mental health supports are meeting people's needs. And of the group of people who accessed mental health or substance use supports in the last year, only a third of them were covered by public health insurance, and another third were either fully or partially covered by private health insurance. Over 10% paid 100% out of pocket. And the others used things like EAP, free self-help, or online and community supports. So let me talk about how not to improve access and care. Number one, just add money to the existing system and stir. Doesn't work. Number two, just produce more psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers. Not enough. Number three, a report from the United States 3 years ago estimated that to offer full access to evidence-based mental health care in the traditional ways that we do it would require training almost 4.5 million new mental health professionals, or 450,000 in Canada in terms of equivalencies. Well, that's not going to happen. Number 4, just build more psychiatric beds and hospitalize more people against their will, including for substance use disorders, which has become popular as an approach lately. Not going to work. However, what makes these ways of trying to improve access and care appealing is that they are A, familiar, and B, easy to count. Now, a wiser person than me said that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. This was either said by William Cameron or Albert Einstein, nobody knows who. But somebody else, whose identity we don't know, said, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." And I am a big fan of data. And that's why I wrote my book, We Can Do Better, Urgent Innovations to Improve Access and Care. Because as a clinician, I felt dissatisfaction with how things are, and also curiosity and hope for the future. The unmet need is huge, and growing awareness and decreased stigma have actually increased the unmet need. And while we have no cures, like most of medicine, we do know we can make things better for people with mental illness and substance use. So let me start with one such innovation. How many of you, and again, I won't see the show of hands, have heard of the Strongest Families Institute? This is something that was created in the province of Nova Scotia, whose two biggest exports are fish and brains. And this is an example of the latter. Because think for a moment how hard it is for a young child with a common disorder, whether it's behavioral, emotional, or attentional, how hard it is to get help and how long does it take. Enter the Strongest Families Institute, which provides to families manualized coaching by telephone in the evenings using trained, supervised, and monitored coaches. And they do it at a time when families are most likely to be home and to be together. And they have a 45-minute session weekly. And I've listened into these sessions, and you would not guess that they are manualized. They sound very natural and spontaneous. And rather than have people sitting in an office, they use either a call center or a secure home setting for the coaches, so both the providers and the recipients can be at home. They use a battery of screening tools, rating scales, and outcome measures, and it's all up there on a dashboard that families can access. This is currently in use in 4 Atlantic provinces in both languages, in BC, in Manitoba, in parts of Ontario, Northwest Territories, Finland, Vietnam, New Zealand, and there's been long-standing involvement with the Eskasoni First Nation in Cape Breton, which is the largest Indigenous community in Atlantic Canada. And yet, most Canadians have never heard of the Strongest Families Institute. The current model costs about $1,000 for 17 weekly sessions per family over 5 months. But the cost is absorbed, it's not given to the client. And of course, like everything else, they've now developed an app. Now, Strongest Families Institute, like social workers, does not make formal diagnoses, but rather simply addresses problems. And what are the problems that they address? Well, parent training for childhood common behavior disorders for kids aged 3 to 12. A program for kids aged 6 to 7 with anxiety called Chase Worries Away. A separate anxiety program for children aged 12 to 17, as well as programs for adult anxiety and depression. Children struggling with chronic pain have a separate program. children with nighttime bedwetting between the ages of 5 and 12. There's a tailored program for them. And each of these programs is based on teaching children and families strategies and skills for dealing with specific situations, thoughts and feelings that are triggered, and they use role play, problem solving, and psychoeducation. But going back to data, they use lots of quality and quantity indicators and benchmarks for the coaches in a way that we would never apply to traditional mental health professionals. And indeed, these are not traditional mental health professionals, because it creates a whole new cadre of providers who they call coaches, who are rapidly and intensively trained up in a period of weeks to months, and then closely monitored and supervised. Now think for a moment, when was the last time that your own clinical work was closely monitored and supervised with outcome audits? The coaches tend to be women, but not exclusively, in their mid-20s, usually with an undergraduate degree, who have experience with children and families as a teacher or a PSW or other roles. So this approach, the Strongest Families approach, is part of the essential modern era of measurement-based care, because we know that measurement-based care is associated with better clinical outcomes in clinical trials. And the evaluation of outcome is done by staff other than the coaches in order to reduce the potential for bias in evaluation. Now, because it's the 21st century, Strongest Families also uses intelligent software that takes into account information specific to children and families and weaves it into personalized suggestions and recommendations. This software gets activated on referral as parents enter their data through a secure portal. Then the software customizes and contextualizes exercises and examples in a way that our traditional self-help books cannot. So in the old days, you might give somebody a copy of Mind Over Mood or some other self-help book that is not unique and personal to that individual. The software also creates these progress dashboards that families can access to know how they're doing. And it also draws on a library of audio examples of interactions between parents and children that demonstrate the skills relevant to the child and family. It's smart enough to send tips and reminders between sessions, and it has triggers and flags and quality assurance functions. These are, again, all things that we do not routinely do as clinicians. And you may be a little creeped out by the software that can customize to you, but remember, that's exactly what Netflix and Crave and Amazon are doing all the time when they say, if you liked this, you may enjoy. And the same thing happens with your discount coupons at the grocery store, which are tailored to your purchasing habit. Let me move on to another major area of innovation, which is integrated youth services. We know that the age of maximum risk for onset of mental health problems and illnesses is adolescence and young adulthood. At least 70% of adult disorders have their onset during that high-risk period. But we also have data made in Ontario that tells us all too often that the first point of care for mental health in this population is an emergency room, which is frankly expensive, scary, and too late in the journey. So this has led to the evolution of integrated youth services, which I would argue is the single biggest change in the delivery of mental health care in Canada. Again, with a virtual show of hands, I might ask how many of you have heard of it. It's based on the Headspace model in Australia, where they have more than 100 sites across that country. Here in Canada, this has many names. In Ontario, it's known as YHU, an acronym that stands for Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario. In British Columbia, it's called Foundry, it's called Huddle in Manitoba, Kickstand in Alberta, and these are all youth-generated names, Air Ouverte in Quebec. And it began in Canada as a project called Access Open Minds. And Access was not only a noun, it was an acronym, standing for Adolescent and Young Adult Connections to Community-Driven, Early, Strengths-Based, and Stigma-Free Services. It's a mouthful, so they needed an acronym. And it was launched across 6 provinces and territories and 14 sites as a $25 million research project funded by the Canadian Institutes for Health Research and the Graham Beck Foundation. What are the essential components of integrated youth services? Well, it has a goal of increasing the number of young people seen with targets that are based on the estimated prevalence rates for young people with mental illness, and doing so by lowering the barriers to access. In other words, no appointment needed, no referral needed, people seen within 72 hours of seeking help, getting help that is evidence-informed, and that takes the form of cognitive behavioral therapy, solution-focused brief therapy, motivational interviewing, and emotion-focused family therapy. Psychiatric assessments, if they're needed, and only if, will occur within 30 days. There is an elimination of that ridiculous formal transition at age 18 from the youth system to the adult system. And all of this is based on engaging youth and families in the design of the service, from the physical layout to the operations, as well as to the ongoing oversight and governance of these youth wellness hubs. It's typically in a casual storefront setting, and I've been in them, it looks very non-clinical, and it's intended to be one-stop shopping for adolescents and young adults, where they can address academic, vocational, social, physical, and mental health needs in a single location. It's a great example of philanthropy kickstarting government engagement, because now governments are all in across the country on funding integrated youth services. And of course, it's providing virtual help as well. At the moment, there are 50 sites that are operational and another 60 sites that are in development across Canada, but the target is 400 sites across the country. And as I say, they're in a number of provinces: Quebec, Ontario, BC, Manitoba, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. PEI, Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut are currently in exploration. What I'm excited about is that as this spreads like brush fire across Canada, there is a spirit of collaboration across boundaries on a common data set and measurement of outcomes. This was unprecedented for Canada to have a common data set. What do we know about how it's working so far? Well, we've got some interim data from the Access Open Minds that tells us 80% of people seen had prior unmet need, and 75% were in severe distress. More than 90% felt that Access Open Minds helped them. And in terms of looking at who is getting help, it was demonstrated that marginalized youth in terms of race, poverty, sexual orientation, other parameters, were using this service in significant numbers. 83% were seen within 72 hours of initial contact. And in terms of return on investment, every dollar invested in Access Open Minds led to $9.80 in avoided costs for traditional youth mental health services. And there are many more detailed research studies pending. Let me shift from that to an item that all of us possess. I have mine right here, smartphones. It's estimated there are now 6.3 billion smartphones in the world, and they're held by 80% of the world's population. 5 years ago, it was less than 50% of the population. Mental health smartphone apps are abundant and are proliferating ahead of the evidence for more than a decade. And text messaging programs have been around even longer. There are now more than 10,000 mental health apps. Out of those 10,000, there's probably a handful of good ones. We know we have excellent apps for helping people with PTSD. And this is a free app that was originally developed in the US by the Veterans Authority, rigorously evaluated, and is now available as PTSD Coach in Canada, as well as cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, perhaps one of the most common symptoms that Canadians experience. And the first line treatment for insomnia is not a prescription. It's not any one of the over-the-counter alls like Gravol or alcohol. It's in fact cognitive behavioral therapy tailored for insomnia. And there's an excellent app, CBT Coach, for that, as well as apps to help people with meditation, with prospective mood tracking, as well as chatbots that incorporate artificial intelligence. Now, there are a couple that have been evaluated. One of them is called Woebot, from a psychologist at Stanford, spelled Woebot, and another one from the Silicon Valley of India, namely Bangalore, called Wysa, W-Y-S-A. What is the upside of these chatbots, which basically leverage cognitive behavioral therapy? Well, unlike humans, these chatbots remember every single thing you say to them through text. And they also reach out to you if you don't connect with them after initially registering. They pay attention to you 100% of the time, unlike us humans. The downside is they can still make mistakes like humans. And for any of you who have tried ChatGPT and ask it to write the story of your life, you'll see exactly how much they can get wrong. There's always concerns about privacy. Where is the data going? Or the pressure to buy the pro model rather than the free version, and limited outcome data. But by last year, there had already been 145 randomized controlled trials involving more than 47,000 people. And the outcome of all of that is highly suggestive that these apps can be helpful for anxiety, stress, depression, and quality of life. What I would encourage each of you to do is take one personally for a test drive on your phone and see if it makes sense to you before recommending it to anyone else. Now, obviously, there are concerns about AI, and I won't go into that in any detail. But I will tell you that an anthropologist who studies mental health tried using one of these apps, in particular Wobot, in the wake of experiencing some losses during the pandemic. And he wrote an excellent essay about it called My Therapist, the Robot, that was in the New York Times last fall. And when he addressed the fear that humans express of being replaced by these robots, he noted that when it comes to access to mental health care globally, that you can't replace something that doesn't exist. In other words, that we have huge, huge amounts of people with unmet need. And it's not designed to replace every other available form of therapy. It's simply one tool in a larger ecosystem of options. And those are the words of the creator. Now, this anthropologist who experimented with Wobot to see what it was like came to this conclusion. He said that humans have an innate ability to create bonds beyond themselves. But people imbue statues with symbolic power, believe their pets have personalities, and anchor their memories of their loved ones who've passed to objects they once held. And as technology becomes increasingly capable of lifelike interactions, it's worth considering whether it can be used for healing. Using Wobot was like reading a good book of fiction. I never lost the sense that it was anything more than an algorithm, but I was able to suspend my disbelief and allow the experience to carry me elsewhere, beyond the clouded sky of my worst thoughts to the blue beyond. One of the other ways in which this kind of technology may be helpful is without even actively interacting with your phone, because we can now use passive monitoring via your phone to create what's called a digital phenotype. In other words, a digital marker of how you're doing. And that can be done through physical movement. As you know, it'll count your steps for you, and it'll count your speed. It'll also track keystroke speed, geo-tracking, what websites you go to, and that's used now to detect early relapse in people with bipolar disorder or psychosis. And in fact, there was a big Danish study done that showed correlations between your mood state and the passive monitoring through digital phenotyping via your phone. Right now at CAMH, there's a study involved using just a ring on your finger that monitors a lot of these parameters in people with bipolar disorder to see if it provides a richer picture of people's functioning. And if you think about it, the traditional way is to have people come in for an appointment and then ask them, how were they feeling a month ago? Asking them to recall things rather than having monitoring in the moment. One of the biggest revolutions in terms of innovation has occurred in the United Kingdom for more than a decade. It's actually almost 15 years old. And it is a program, a national program, to improve access to psychotherapy. Because access to psychotherapy in England, much as in Ontario, is a much bigger problem for people with mental health problems than is access to medications. And it was started in the UK in 2005, and it includes self-referral to publicly funded therapy provided by an entirely new class of therapists, if that echoes what I said before about strongest families. And they've trained up over 10,000 of these therapists. And they're called psychological well-being practitioners. because they couldn't call them psychologists or social workers or psychiatrists because they're not. And these people have performance standards, curricula, and intense supervision. They provide low-intensity treatments, while the traditional mental health professionals like you and me provide higher intensity treatment. This program is now called the National Health Service Talking Therapies. So how many people are using this? Well, in 2021-22, 1.2 million people in England accessed the program, and the target for this year is 1.9 million people. Let me say something about public accountability. Wait times and clinical evaluation are all available on a website that anyone in the world can access. And they have outcome measurement on 98% of all clinical encounters, which is hard to imagine. They have standards on how many people should start, for how many people start treatment, for wait times. Their wait time standard, we have no such standards in Canada, is 75% should start within 6 weeks, and that's a target that they have surpassed. They have targets for how many people should get better, and the bar was set at a minimum of 50% of people being no longer symptomatic enough to qualify for a diagnosis, and they met that bar. They capture access data by diagnosis, age, gender, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, geography, and employment status, all of which are potential barriers to care. Imagine having this kind of data capture in Canada. Now, a more diluted version of this is available in Ontario, called the Increasing Access to Structured Psychotherapy Program. All of the psychological therapies, in terms of their principles, are evidence-based and delivered at the appropriate dose, matched to the mental health problem, and the intensity and the duration is designed to optimize clinical outcomes. Everybody who works within this program is trained, supervised, and again, having their performance measured continuously on a weekly basis. And services are delivered using a stepped care model, which works according to the principle that people should be offered the least intrusive intervention appropriate to their needs first. So who do they try to help? People with agoraphobia, the fear of going outside, people with body dysmorphic disorder, depression, generalized anxiety, health anxiety, mixed depression and anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, social anxiety or social phobia, and people with specific phobias like fear of heights or flying or spiders. And they start with guided self-help based on CBT, and then they move it up the ladder to more formal and typical individual and group psychotherapies. They are also trying to focus in on particular groups at risk: seniors, students, veterans, people who are pregnant, unemployed people. They're offering services in Arabic and Urdu in some regions of England. And in the London borough of Ealing, they offer treatment in over 20 languages. Now, they have taken the position that services should offer a choice of in-person or remotely delivered therapies. And most of the in-person therapy is provided in local settings that are easy for people to access, whether they're family doctor practices or clinics or community settings or voluntary organizations. Now, not surprisingly with the pandemic, more and more people are opting to have their therapy remotely. And they're starting to offer digitally enabled therapies via the net. So this is a big change, but it's taken a national effort in Britain, and it's the kind of thing that we need to see kickstarted here in Canada. There are dropouts, as there are with every treatment, but it's a big change. Now, here in Canada, we also have access to internet-delivered cognitive behavioral therapy. And this is actually an online revolution that's available now. And we have good evidence that web-delivered CBT programs that are customized for patients and also therapist-guided. And by that I mean a therapist who is monitoring the work people are doing online and is available for text messaging without limit during the course of treatment. That can make a huge difference and actually performs as well as old-fashioned CBT. You will remember that during the pandemic, the Ontario government made these freely available to Ontario citizens. There were two competing versions, one called Mind Beacon and the other called Ability CBT. They're still covered by private health benefits, and they're still cheaper than traditional mental health providers. But let me again reiterate, we are not being replaced. I'm not being replaced. You're not being replaced. I have seen people replaced at our hospital, non-clinical people replaced by smartphones and AI, things like medical billing clerks or transcriptionists for dictation. It reinvents workspaces, but it does not eliminate the role of clinicians. Now, I'm going to skip ahead to address one more topic in innovation, and there are many more that I could cover. And that is a problem that all of us in Canada are painfully aware of, which is homelessness. I want to remind you that more than a decade ago, Canada led the world, and it still continues to lead the world, in research on new models of care for people who are homeless and mentally ill. The study called At Home Chez Soi was conducted by the Mental Health Commission of Canada and funded by the Canadian government to the tune of $110 million. And for those of you who may not be familiar with it, this was a study where we recruited more than 2,000 chronically homeless and mentally ill individuals in Vancouver, Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, and Moncton to be randomly assigned to either treatment as usual or an intervention called Housing First. Treatment as usual for people who are homeless and mentally ill all too often means a triangle between emergency rooms, shelters, and jails, the three most expensive ways to provide help for people who are homeless and mentally ill. By contrast, Housing First provided people with rent-subsidized, immediate access, furnished housing, and they had a choice of housing, with the understanding that they would agree to be visited by a worker weekly. They didn't have to agree to take part in treatment, although many subsequently opted to. This was the largest study ever done in the world in homelessness. And I can tell you that my experiences when I was chair of the Mental Health Commission of visiting participants in their homes when they invited me in to their homes was among the most moving events of my career. And these people, the participants, had been homeless on average for more than 5 years when they were recruited into the study. And they demonstrated the dignity and self-respect when they were properly housed. And this has been an incredible experience, and the longer term findings of this study is that people who were housed in the experimental arm of Housing First, compared to the control group who got treatment as usual. The Housing First group spent more time in stable housing, was obviously more rapidly housed, had a more positive view of the quality of their housing, and were far less likely to use shelters. And if you looked 6 years after the study was over, the people who were in Housing First were definitely more stably housed than the people who were in the treatment as usual group. So, where do we go from here? Well, in my experience, many communities right across the country, and I've been in every province and territory of this country, have been creative in meeting needs better. But Canada, sadly, remains the land of pilot projects, and what happens in Newfoundland is completely unknown in Manitoba, and vice versa. So, what do we need to do? Well, first of all, we need to network up to improve communication among providers, not just provincially, like the Ontario Association of Social Workers, but nationally, like the Integrated Youth Services have done, to develop a common language, a common approach, common outcome measures. We need to scale up to take good ideas and test them in different environments, as we did with At Home Chez Soi, where the problems of homelessness in Moncton were different than Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver or Winnipeg. And similarly with Access Open Minds, where the problems for youth in an Indigenous remote community were different than the problems for youth in a downtown urban community. We need to fund up. Right now in Canada, we spend 7% of our total healthcare funding on mental health. There are other jurisdictions that are spending as much as 18% of their health funding on mental health. So surely we can do better. And finally, we need to measure up. We need to have public accountability for the outcomes of what we do. And we need to have the people and their families who use our services involved in the design, the governance, and the outcome evaluation. And if we do all of that, I feel confident that we can and will do better. And I look forward to your contributions in that effort. And I thank you for all you've already done in that regard. And I also thank you for your attention during this talk.
Thank you, Dr. Goldbloom, once again for your partnership and for sharing your incredibly timely insights. I think the sheer volume of questions that have resulted from your presentation show the interest and timeliness of what you presented to us this afternoon. You've certainly left us all feeling energized and really motivated about what's possible for the future of mental health in Ontario. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today for your commitment and support of the association. We look forward to continuing our work together to chart the course for the next chapter of our profession. So thank you for being here, everyone, and have a great afternoon.